to this morning's Transport Committee of the London Assembly. Shall we start off with apologies for absence, please?
Chair, we've received apologies for absence from the Chair, Assembly Member Shah, as well as Assembly Members Bacon and Assembly Member Bailey. Assembly Member is attending as a substitute, but he is running late.
Assembly Member Boff, lovely, thank you. Lovely. And I'm taking over and chairing the meeting as Deputy Chair. And we send our best wishes to Assembly Member Shah. Our main discussion today will be the Mayor's Transport Strategy. We've got a few tiny bits of formal business before that, members. I'm always asked to say, encourage everyone to take part in a discussion on social media using hashtags Assembly Transport and Transport Strategy. Obviously, welcome everyone who's in the public gallery. Could I ask everyone to make sure their electronic devices, including members, are switched to silent, please? And that's silent, not vibrate, because the acoustics here aren't very good, so we pick up phones vibrating. Let's move on to declarations of interest. Are there any other declarations? Can we note those listed in the report? Thank you very much. Minutes. Since the agenda was published, TfL have requested a minor change to the transcript from the February meeting, namely on the final page to refer to period 9 rather than period 5. This will be picked up as a footnote. Apart from that, can we agree the minutes from the 4th of February meeting with that minor amendment? Lovely, thank you very much. Summary list of actions. Can we note the summary list of actions and additional correspondence received? Action taken under delegated authority. Can we note the action taken under delegated authority by Navin Shah, the chair of the committee, namely to agree the committee's report on London's transport now and in the future, and the letter to the Deputy Mayor for Transport on the Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf crossing. Can we note those? Agree? Thank you very much. Right, let's move on to our main item today, which is a sort of review of where we are with the Mayor's Transport Strategy. I'm delighted to welcome Heidi Alexander, Deputy Mayor for Transport, Will Norman, who is the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, and also Alex Williams, who's the Managing Director for City Planning at Transport for London. Just say a lot of our questions will be more directed at the administration, as it were, Alex, so to Heidi and Will, but obviously there's some areas we want to bring you in with your in-depth knowledge. Yep. So I've agreed for Heidi to make a 5 minutes opening statement, so let's move over to you, Heidi, and welcome again.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's good to be here to be able to talk about progress on the Mayor's Transport Strategy. I have to say it does only feel like yesterday that I was here doing my confirmation hearing, and so it feels like a timely moment to review progress. So the Mayor's Transport Strategy, as you will know, is a world-leading strategy, not just in relation to its public transport credentials, but also with respect to how we plan cities more broadly so that they're fit for the future. Obviously, I can't take credit for the development of the MTS. My predecessor, Val, had a bold vision. Much of it developed when she was sat on your side of the table. And the excellent piece of work that it is credit to the brilliant officers at TfL and in the transport team at City Hall. So the MTS is not light on ambition. We've set out that we want to see a fundamental shift in how Londoners move around the city, reducing dependency on the car. And if we're going to hit our target of 80% of journeys being made by people walking, cycling or using public transport by 2041, we need to see 3 million fewer daily car journeys taking place. So it's a big challenge. But if you look at the history of travel in London, we've shown we can do this. In the last 20 years, sustainable mode share has gone from 52% to 63%. That's the equivalent of taking 2.9 million daily car journeys off the road, and that's in the context of 1 million more people living here. So whilst we have set ourselves a big challenge, it's not insurmountable. The truth is, though, the easy wins have been made, and we always knew that the first few years of implementing the new strategy were going to be hard. I'd of course make the point that this is compounded by financial challenges, not least the withdrawal of the direct operating subsidy worth £700 million a year to TfL. And I'm obviously disappointed that the delay to Crossrail isn't just a delay to new rail capacity for London, but it also has financial implications, delaying the fares revenue that we were expecting. The uncertainty we face in our funding from central government, combined with their insistence that London meets all of the costs regarding the delay of Crossrail, means that some of those historical improvements we've made in mode share can't necessarily be banked again for the future. And I am also concerned about some of the anti-London rhetoric that's coming out of government, which could make the funding situation even worse. Despite this, there are some really big successes that I'm very proud of. We're making travel more affordable with the fares freeze and the Hopper, the night tube tube. The night tube as well is also giving people more affordable options for getting around at night. I know some members of this committee are critical of the fares freeze, but I don't think we can underestimate how this approach has been welcomed by Londoners, especially those on the lowest incomes who have been hit hardest by the impacts of austerity. We are making transport more comfortable and more accessible. We've got some way to go, I know, and there are some isolated, though quite significant events that can undermine the progress we're making. We've got more intensive timetables running on the Victoria line, the Jubilee line, the North London line, new trains on the Gospel Oak to Barking line, and on overground services operating out of Liverpool Street and Euston. 11 underground stations have become step-free since 2016, with a further 11 planned to be completed by the end of the year. We're also playing our part in making our city cleaner and greener. The Mayor recently announced that we've tripled the amount of protected cycle space that has either been completed or under construction across London, and the ULEZ has got to be one of the single biggest actions anyone has ever taken to improve the quality of the air that we breathe. We're also planning for the future. The delay to Crossrail is, as I've said, very disappointing, but we've made good progress in relation to the Northern Line extension and the extension of the overground out to Barking Riverside. Plans for the Bakerloo Line extension and Crossrail 2 are progressing, and we've let contracts for new Piccadilly Line trains and a new DLR fleet. We've also got fully funded plans in place to have 2,000 electric buses on London streets over the next 5 years. None of this would be possible, as I said at the beginning, without the excellent work of everyone at TfL and here at City Hall. I would just like to put on record my thanks to Mike Brown, who I think has been an exceptional commissioner in some very, very challenging circumstances. This really is a team effort, though. Will and I have worked very hard to build good relations with boroughs, irrespective of their political colour. We won't make a reality of the vision set out in the MTS if we don't cooperate and work collaboratively with the boroughs. And I would say that I think there is an excitement about the Healthy Streets agenda that I've not witnessed in the 2 decades that I've been involved in political and civic life in London. So I hope that enthusiasm continues. I'm happy to answer all of your questions today. And I should also just say, whilst I haven't mentioned coronavirus in my opening remarks, if anyone would like to ask me any questions about that or to provide an update on what TfL is doing, I would be happy to do so.
Okay, well, we'll pick that up. I mean, we have seen your announcements this week, and I know I've certainly been emailing TfL just asking about cleaning and so on. We've seen that, but maybe we'll come to that a little bit later. Just for members, because some have arrived late, we have reordered our briefing questions. So we're going to start with Healthy Streets. We're going to do safety on London's transport network. We're then going to look at funding, and then we're going to be doing transport planning. Thank you, transport planning. So just so members know, if you've got any questions on fares, I saw a hand come up, that should come in under the funding section of this briefing. So, Healthy Streets, if I could perhaps kick off with that. Do you want to start actually with the coronavirus update, just if you've got something brief you want to say on that, Heidi, and what you're doing before we move into the detail on Healthy Streets?
Yeah, well, I think you will know that TfL is taking this whole situation very seriously. It's in constant contact with Public Health England, and City Hall is also in constant contact with Public Health England and the Chief Medical Officer. In terms of what TfL is doing, it has really 3 main objectives at the moment, and that's to protect and maintain the public transport network and the function across the city, and to ensure that it is safe for everyone. They have a duty of care as employers, both to their directly employed staff and to contractors, and you will know that there have been 2 confirmed cases of coronavirus at TfL premises, and we're also looking to make sure that we maintain organisational resilience going forward as this situation develops. We've taken a number of actions already. We have announced the enhanced cleaning regime on the tube and other modes of transport. We have responded quickly to the confirmed cases of our employees and a contracted member of staff, and have followed very closely the advice from Public Health England, as you would expect us to, with regard to deep cleaning of our premises, and advice to staff who work closely or have worked closely with those individuals. We're using all of our communication channels across the network to share the advice from Public Health England about how to stay safe, about regular hand washing, as you would expect us to be. And as I mentioned, we are reviewing our business continuity plans to ensure that as this situation evolves, that we are in a good place to keep the public transport network running.
Are you noticing a reduction in passengers across the transport network as a result of this?
There has been a small reduction. Usage of the public transport network does tend to fluctuate anyway, but there has been a small reduction. We think this may be linked to some people preempting advice about working from home, some businesses testing their resilience plans. We will continue to monitor very closely this trend so that we can plan accordingly.
Lovely, thank you for that update. Let's move into Healthy Streets. You already said the strategy is not light on ambition, and you've got the bold target by 2041 for 80% of trips to be by sustainable modes of travel. How likely is it, do you think, you're going to meet that target, and what are the biggest risks to achieving it?
So I think we can meet it. It is challenging, and whilst we're moving in the right direction, we might not be moving quite as quickly as I would like us to be. I think one of the key things is to ensure that if you want to reduce dependency on the car to get around London, then you need to provide people with really high quality, accessible public transport options. And if you look at the 5-year business plan that we published in December, there are a very significant number of schemes that enhance capacity and improve connectivity. Whether that's the continued work on the 4 Lines modernisation programme, which affects 40% of the tube network, which will increase capacity on the District Circle, Hammersmith and City and Metropolitan line by 33% overall. We've got new trains coming on the Piccadilly line, which will increase capacity in and of themselves. We're progressing really well with the work on the Northern Line extension, the Barking Riverside extension. We've got all of those things funded, as well as an ambitious programme in terms of healthy streets, so that we are making the infrastructure safer in London, enabling more people to walk and cycle more often. We're also planning the next generation of transport projects as well. If you think about something like Crossrail, which in and of itself will revolutionise public transport when it opens, adding 10% to London's rail capacity. The plans for Crossrail weren't dreamt up overnight. They were 40 years in the making, and so whilst we have got a challenging financial climate at TfL at the moment, I think it is right that we are spending some of our resources on thinking about the longer term, the medium and longer term answer. So we've submitted our updated strategic outline business case on Crossrail to the department. We're talking to them about safeguarding an updated route for Crossrail 2. We've started conversations with the Department of Transport about the Bakerloo line extension and safeguarding the route there, where there's some development pressure coming forward in places such as New Cross. We're also working on some smaller scale schemes such as the West London Orbital, the DLR to Thamesmead, the Sutton Tram, and I think that if you put that package together, it really starts to improve connectivity right across London, because there is a challenge in outer London in particular, and Will might want to say some more about what we're doing on the Healthy Streets agenda in outer London. So that's why I'm confident. I think the risks that you asked me about, I would say the first major risk is certainty about government funding, because you can't make the mode shift that we want to see unless you're investing in public transport. I also think we need to move forward with the boroughs. They control 95% of the road network, and so we need to work in collaboration with them. And I think we've also got to keep a very close eye on the changing way that people are living their lives at the moment. People are moving around the city in different ways. If you look at internet shopping habits, for example, we see a huge number of personal deliveries to central London offices. We know that there was an explosion in the use of minicabs. One of the reasons why we got rid of the exemption, the congestion charge exemption for minicabs last year, because if we're not cognizant of these changes in the way that people live their lives and the way that people move around and plan for them, I think we do run the risk of just ending up with a different type of traffic jam to the one that we've got now. And so I think those are some of the broad risks, I would say, in terms of actually delivering against the 80% target.
That's very, very helpful indeed. You mentioned just in the updated strategic outline business case for Crossrail 2. Is it possible for the committee to see a copy?
I don't know whether we can share one at the moment, given that we're still in discussions with government about it, but that's certainly a subject I could talk to TfL officers about.
Or if not, whether we could get a high-level sort of summary of what's key in it, just would be useful. Yeah, is that okay? Alex is nodding. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to Will, because you pointed out the Outer London issues and low levels of cycling in Outer London. Is that going to be one of the biggest challenges, Will, in achieving this target?
Definitely. I think at the moment the Outer London, the sort of sustainable mode shift, the sustainable mode in Outer London is about 55%. So to get to that 80% is obviously for whole of London, but there's obviously the greatest amount to do, I think, in Outer London. Historically, there hasn't been that same level of investment in Outer London that we've seen in Central London and parts of Inner London. So I think there is a huge amount to do there. I think thinking that cycling and walking are going to solve all of Outer London problems is simply not true. I think walking from sort of, I don't know, Hounslow to Dagenham is not a serious proposition in terms of a walking route. But what we've got to look at is the types of journeys that people are making. How can we reduce those car journeys that are less necessary? So every day in London, a third of all car journeys are under 2 kilometres. They're 250,000 car journeys every morning just associated with the school run. Yeah, those are some of the things that we need to be offering alternatives to enable people to take other modes of transport. And Outer London clearly is is an area where there's huge potential to drive that shift. Part of that is about moving people to thinking, right, instead of the car all the way, how can we make a walk, a cycle to a train station or a bus stop in terms of that interchange, and then moving on that journey using another form of sustainable mode. So I think just putting this all down to walking and cycling is wrong, and that's certainly not our strategy. But as I said, there's been a massive underinvestment in Outer London. So that is what we've been addressing. I think you can see the sort of the cycling, certainly there's a dense walking network in central London. You can see the numbers of people who walk in central London. I think the challenge in central London is around pedestrian safety more than anything else, and that sort of thing. But in Outer London, that investment simply hasn't been there for recently. But that's changing. So, for example, through the Mini Holland schemes in Waltham Forest, in Enfield, and in Kingston, you've seen £100 million worth of investment going in there, and that's yielding results. The Livable Neighbourhood programme that is, again, looking at area-wide solutions, working with the boroughs. So that's not something that TfL is prescribing on boroughs, and it goes back to Heidi's approach of how do we work collaboratively with boroughs. Those are proposals that are coming from those communities, that are coming from those councils suggesting this is something that how we aspire to meet that mode change in our areas. And out of those schemes that we've funded up until now, 8 of those have been 8 of the 15 have been in Outer London, and I hope we will have an announcement shortly on the next phase of that programme, which again, they look like there's some very promising schemes in Outer London. So that investment is going on. If you look at cycling specifically, as Heidi said, we've tripled the amount of protective cycle infrastructure in London in the last 4 years. There's obviously more than just the protective infrastructure. The protective is where you've got physical separation along main roads and other things. There's also the network of routes on quieter roads, back roads and X, Y and Z. But actually, if you break down the investment and the delivery of that protected infrastructure, 50% of that protected infrastructure has been in outer London boroughs. Yeah? And that will continue. So the stuff we've got in the pipeline, I think I'm going down to look at the progress from North Acton to Wood Lane. New cycle route should be complete in the next couple of weeks. Cycleway 9 is going out to Hounslow and beyond for that. Cycleway, I was down and looking at the changes that happened at Rotherhithe Roundabout. That's now going on to Greenwich and on to Woolwich, and the proposals are building up there. So what we're seeing is a densification of that network that is driving change in central London and the expansion of that network into other areas, because it's not fair that only people coming in to work in central London or who live in central and in London get the benefits of being more physically active, as well as the benefits that come from from air quality and in terms of reduced congestion. So all of that's in the pipeline. But as I said, there is a long way to go in central London, in outer London. We're investing there. Where we put that investment in, we're seeing massive increases in the number of people cycling. So I was out in Waltham Forest the other day, and I think someone was talking about a 113% increase in using some of those routes that are happening there. So where we build the high quality infrastructure, it enables people to do it. We're seeing that shift. We obviously have a long way to do, a lot more to do, and a long way to go, but that's the plan.
Thank you. And the Mini Holland you talked about,
Yeah.
which obviously started under the previous administration, carried on.
Yeah.
Have you got an actual analysis, some sort of review that's been done? Because I hear lots of very positive things about them. They're all very different.
Yeah.
Have we got any analysis that's been done that really does show what the modal shift's been? I mean, I've heard positive things about the impact on local businesses. So
Yeah.
I wonder whether...
So there's ongoing work. Those schemes are not. I think the Waltham Forest Mini Holland scheme is pretty much complete.
Yeah.
There is more stuff going on. So once people, what we're finding with those schemes, and same in Enfield and in Kingston, is where people see the changes. Other communities saying, we want some of that.
Yeah.
That looks great. We can
Yeah.
see that. So that's part of a sustained funding program that TfL are continuing to work with. But there is evidence coming out of the successes of this. The Waltham Forest one, I think, is probably the one that springs to mind in terms of the evidence. And I'm happy to share. As that evidence builds up,
Yes.
we'll keep on sharing it. But we've seen a 32 minutes of walking and cycling a week on average for people living in those areas. So that bucks every trend across the country. So where we're seeing across the country, the levels of physical activity sadly are falling around the country. We have something like 80% of kids in the UK are physically inactive, according to the World Health Organization. Yeah. That's a ticking time bomb for our health system. Yeah, and yet where we put these investments in, we're seeing the shift go the other way. 32 minutes more walking a week is fantastic, yes. Given the targets that we need to meet. So we are seeing those changes. We're seeing that life expectancy. Now, you've got to question some of the. There's some of the independent research shows that life expectancy is increasing in Waltham Forest by at least 7 months. Now, whether it's 7 months or 5 months, whatever, it's a good thing that life expectancy is increasing in those areas. But it's more than just the health benefits. We're also seeing local businesses benefit from this. So, for example, London University did a study recently looking at retail properties in those areas where we've been making those changes, and they found that where the changes have happened, 17% fewer empty retail outlets. Yeah, we see greater footfall into those shops. We see greater spend in those shops. So we're seeing the successes of that spread out. And so you've got the health benefits, the economic benefits, but you're also seeing air quality benefits. So in Waltham Forest, 51,000 households are no longer living with dangerous levels of air pollution compared with where they were before the scheme went in. So we are beginning to see that realised, and I think that's what's driving this shift, this appetite to do more in communities across the country, across London, and that's irrespective of the political persuasions of the makeup of the councils. Councils are seeing, well, that's something that's great. It's improving quality of life. It's being replicated across the UK, so people are coming to London and say, we want some of that. That looks fantastic. And recently we're getting more international visits. So again, it just confirms what we're doing is the right strategy. Yes, it needs to be faster. Yes, it needs to be quicker. We need more of it, but it is working.
Okay, great. Maybe TfL, if you've done some analysis or are planning some around the Mini Holland, you could let us know.
As Will said, there is a report on Waltham Forest, which
That could be
it was
shared.
actually done by the borough, actually, but we'll get
We
it
could
shared.
share that. That would be
Yep.
good. But I would have thought TfL might want to do that, given its significant investment. Obviously, Crossrail has been delayed, and significant delays associated with that project. Are you factoring in, looking at your plans, significant infrastructure delays, and how that might impact on your mode share targets, Heidi?
Well, I think the 80% mode share target is over the course of the next 20 years, and whilst there may be some short-term impact related to the Crossrail delay, in as much as, you know, if Crossrail was up and running the full route now, then some people that might choose to drive into London from somewhere like Reading might actually, you know, had the whole route been open, they might have thought, well, there's a seamless journey where I don't have to change from Reading straight into Tottenham Court Road. And so obviously some people may still be choosing to make some journeys by car when, had the route been opened, they would have chosen to go on this fantastic new service. And so whilst in the short term there may be some impact, at the point at which Crossrail is open, then we'll be catching up. And I think we've always been clear that the trajectory of improvement is not going to be completely linear. In some years you'll see more of an uptick in mode share improvement than you would in other years. But I don't think we can underestimate the impact that Crossrail will have. It will provide a step change in terms of accessibility. It does add 10% capacity, and it is also driving quite a lot of change in London's built environment. I mean, if you go and stand on the platform at Ilford Station or go down to Woolwich, you can see the homes that are going up there. When people are moving to homes that perhaps have lower car parking standards, much more likely to be using the public transport more often, then, you know, that's the positive of what Crossrail brings.
Yeah.
So potentially
short-term
impact,
on,
but not in the
you're
long
not
term.
worried about others. Okay, that's fine. And can I just finally pick up, before I bring other members in, the ULEZ, really important, bold policy, set out, I think in policy 6 of the strategy. Can you give us a bit more information? The expansion is going ahead. Are you also looking at how you could then expand to cover the whole of London? What's your time frame for decision making on that? Because it's due to come in October 2021. And also, is it going to be, as we had recommended as a committee, that the technology you use is future-proof so that it could then work with a road pricing scheme or others that you might bring in the future?
So, as you have said, the plan is to extend the ultra-low emission zone out to the north and south circular in October 2021. There's quite a lot of work that's underway at the moment, planning for how you do that, because it is quite a significant technological undertaking, because you're creating a new boundary in London, and in order to be able to enforce the ultra-low emission zone, not only will you need to enforce movements across the boundary, but also journeys within the boundary if people are driving in a car that is not compliant. It is also just worth remembering that by the point in time when ULEZ expansion takes place, our current predictions suggest that about 80% of vehicles will be compliant, so the £12.50 charge won't be applying to everyone that is either driving into or within the zone, but will just apply to those people who are driving in non-compliant vehicles. And you will be aware, and I think it's just worth reminding people, that the Mayor has launched a scrappage fund for low-income Londoners, for disabled Londoners, and for small businesses, so people can start to prepare themselves for that change coming in 2021. You asked about the technology and whether it is future-proofed. I think you may have asked the same question of Mike Brown when he was in front of you
I may well have done
last week or the week before. You'll be pleased to know that I studiously watched the proceedings at the weekend, and I think he confirmed to you that obviously that technology could be adapted in future, and you will be aware what is set out in terms of the Mayor's transport strategy about a very long-term ambition to look at how you might move to a more sophisticated form of road user charging, where you could be charged on the basis of distance travelled, the emissions performance of your vehicle, perhaps the time of day that you're driving, perhaps even whether there are other public transport alternatives available to you. But that's a really, really big piece of work, and the priority at the moment is on the expansion of ULEZ in 2021. That's a big undertaking. We've also got the strengthening of the low emission zone that applies to heavy goods vehicles, and that applies across the whole of London at the moment. So whether that's lorries, coaches, and the strengthening of the low emission zone as opposed to the ultra low emission zone is due to come in later this year.
Okay, thank you. But it sounds, Alex, have you got some more information on that?
What I'll just add to that is, well, there's two things. One, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact the Central London low emission zone is a phenomenal success.
Yes.
To go from 39% compliance to 77% compliance in 2.5 years is astounding.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever come across a scheme that's been as successful as that, and there's a lot of kind of planets have aligned to make that happen. But ULEZ expansion is a big challenge, 18 times the size of the current zone. There's a lot of technical work underway with the boroughs and the cameras and the back office, things like that. There's also a work stream that will start in June on actually raising people's awareness of the scheme, because I think it's well known within circles we frequent probably, but London is not necessarily as aware of it as they need to be. So a big communication campaign starting in June to raise awareness of the scheme and let people know that this scheme is coming and what they need to do to prepare to change to cleaner vehicles or no vehicles, because we want that 80% figure that Heidi referred to be even higher if we can.
And I think it is just also worth mentioning that if you look at the introduction of the Central London ULEZ, not only has it resulted in, I think it's 13,500 fewer polluting vehicles in the Central London zone every day, but it's also led to an overall reduction in traffic that we're seeing inside the zone. Now, the introduction of ULEZ coincided with the removal of the congestion charge exemption for minicabs. Both of those initiatives were introduced on the same day, but it is having quite a significant impact upon overall traffic levels, as well as the number of polluting vehicles that you're seeing in the zone.
Lovely. Right. Assemblymember McCartney wants to come in on the ULEZ, and then I've got Assemblymember Prince.
It's about the scrappage scheme, Heidi. I've just had a couple of issues raised by my pensioners groups who say that for many of their members it is a very complicated process online, especially if you're not computer literate. And even to get a printed application form, you have to register and go through certain steps online, and whether that could be made easier. And they've also raised issues around adapted vehicles, which obviously cost a lot more than standard vehicles, and some of those will not be compliant, and whether TfL could perhaps look again at those who will not qualify because of pension credit, but the costs of adapted vehicles are so much more.
Okay, well, those are both issues that I'm happy to take away and look at. I have been keen that TfL works with the boroughs and their network of community groups locally to ensure that we can provide some direct assistance in completing these forms. The uptake, even though we launched it just a couple of months ago, and it, the scheme is due to last up until 2021, has been quite good, and it's concentrated in, when you look at the map of where the applications have come in from, it is concentrated in some particular areas, and it would be good to make sure that everyone across the whole of London who has a non-compliant vehicle not only knows about the scheme, and we can ramp up awareness of that as we're ramping up awareness of ULEZ expansion, but also has some tailored assistance if needed to be able to go through that application process. If there are ways to simplify it, happy to look at that. I'm also happy to take this specific question away about adapted vehicles.
I'll send you the letters then
Yeah.
after the meeting. Thank you.
Perhaps when in the response to the information we've asked for today, you could put in it so that we're all aware, because
Yeah.
we're bound to start getting casework as well. Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you made some very good points about modal shift and how there needs to be sufficient public transport as an alternative, and that's why, certainly from our side, we question the expansion at this point into the ULEZ to North and South Circulars. So, for instance, I mean, do you think that public transport in Dulwich is good enough to introduce the ULEZ there?
I do think that there are a number of mainline train stations in Dulwich. You've got East Dulwich station. I know that there are other stations around there. My sister-in-law actually didn't used to live too far away from there, and I think the rail network, there's quite a dense bus network that runs through Dulwich as well. I actually think that within that sort of part of London, the sort of zone 2-3 border, which I think Dulwich would probably fall on, I think there are lots of options in terms of public transport, is my view. I don't know whether you have a different view.
Well, yeah, I do. I think you're quite correct when it comes to what I would call linear travel, travel in to and from London. But when you want to move across that part of London, it's very difficult, I find. I certainly tried to get across using the buses, and it took me forever because they just don't actually go exactly where you want them to go. The same would be in my constituency as well. If you want to go to and from London in Havering or Redbridge, it's not a problem. But if you want to actually travel around the boroughs, it's much more difficult because there is this almost like a spoke of a wheel where the vehicles tend to radiate out from the centre, but going from north to south, for instance, in both Redbridge and in Havering, it's very difficult to do on public transport.
Yeah, so I understand the point you're making about the quality of radial routes into the centre of London compared to orbital links between different town centres. One of the ways we are changing the bus network in Outer London is to look at improving some of those orbital links. And so in Harrow, for example, we've introduced a number of new bus routes in the last year, including the X140, which is an express service from Harrow round to Heathrow. On the other side of London, in your part of London, we've also introduced a new bus service between Harold Hill and Harold Wood. In Havering, we're quite conscious that there's new development happening, there's people moving in. You need to be able to link people to other parts of the public transport network. I would also say that the document that we published last year, which is the strategic case for metroisation of southern and southeastern services, is part of the long-term solution to this problem, because for a relatively modest, in railway terms, investment in infrastructure, you could start to link up different town centres in South London and obviate the need to go into London Bridge to come back out again. And so, that's a problem that we recognise, and it was part of the rationale behind publishing that document last year.
Okay, thank you. You did actually touch on it as well in relation to the expansion out to North and South Circular of the ULEZ. You're going to have a challenge capturing everybody on the border, especially. I'm using the South Circular as an example because I think with the North Circular, because it's such a good road, it's got more limited access points. But on the South Circular, I mean, it's worse than a normal road in many cases. But the real challenge is going to be what happens in between. So when you go out to the North Circular, if you've got a car and you say you live in Bow or somewhere like that, the challenge is going to be how do you pick up those people who've got their in your eyes, polluting vehicles in Bow when they may never get anywhere near the North Circular or anywhere near the congestion zone?
Yeah, so this is the piece of work that TfL has started and will continue with over the next couple of months. It's about the cameras that you have in place to pick up vehicle movements, both at the border and within the zone. Some of those cameras may be mobile because you need to get an optimum number so that there isn't unnecessary surveillance, but that you are picking up sufficient journeys so that people recognise that if they're travelling in a polluted vehicle, they will be caught and will have to pay a fine. And so that's a complicated piece of work to do. It's why I also say that that's the whole focus of the organisation at the moment. But there will be sufficient camera coverage to ensure the enforcement of the expanded ULEZ.
So you're going to be looking more at mobile cameras, you think, than within the zone?
It will be a combination.
Okay, and do you have any idea what the cost of these units might be? Perhaps you could write to me with that, actually.
I will write to you.
Yeah, that'd be easier. Right, just one thing on the Mayor's transport plan. Does the Mayor recognise that car clubs are incredibly effective at taking private cars off the road and also have been shown to increase walking, cycling and public transport use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Car clubs aren't the whole answer.
No.
But clearly, you know, the big prize here is to get more people walking, cycling, using public transport more often. But if you're a member of a car club and you don't own your own car, I think there is evidence to suggest that you're likely to use the car for a trip less often. Also, if you're sharing a car through a car club, you are also reducing the number of cars that are going to be parked out on the streets, which does free up space to do other things with that road space. And so I think my own personal view on car clubs is that they should be part of the solution, but they're not the whole solution.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, clearly, I've had meetings with car clubs, and they guesstimate that around about 14 cars come off the road for every car club car. And it's true, isn't it? You know, if you have to make the decision to spend £10 to take the car, you might think, well, actually, I'll only spend £1.50 and take a bus and travel around for an hour for free. So, you know, I think we both agree on the importance of car clubs. So, despite his manifesto commitment to support car clubs as a means of reducing congestion and demand for parking, why are car clubs unmentioned in the Mayor's transport strategy?
So I've had a number of meetings with different car club operators since I came into post, and I think we do see them as part of the solution as I've set out. You know, I think that there's still a cultural shift that we need to go through in London until people become totally comfortable with sharing their car. It's a debate that I've had in my own household. When we came to renew our car, I wanted to join the car club and my husband wanted a new car, and I'm ashamed to say my husband won.
I'm very surprised.
On this occasion only, I'm sure.
Can I just come in? There is a proposal, I think proposal 19 within the Mayor's Transport Strategy, where the Mayor and TfL with the boroughs will support the provision of car clubs. So it is included in there. And like you, I agree that if we can, you know, it's not the whole solution, but it's certainly a good way of looking at reducing that.
It's in there, proposal 19, and it is mentioned in the glossary, so it is in there.
Thank you. Just one quick point. The weakness that seems to be with car clubs and why they don't get a big take-up is because a lot of them you have to return to base. So wherever you pick it up, you have to return it within a certain area. And if they were able to use them for a one-way journey, I think that would create more demand, because you could sort of hire it in Lewisham and leave it in Havering or something. But that doesn't
if
seem
that's
to be
a journey somebody wanted to take.
Well, if that was a journey somebody might want to take, yeah.
I have a good friend that lives in Havering, so it is a journey that I do. There are different models of car clubs that are emerging where you can do exactly that. What it does require is collaboration amongst all of London's boroughs, because if a car club operator is operating from one source area, they need to know that people can then leave their car, the car that they've hired, somewhere else. But there are some different models that...
But isn't this where the mayor could make a big impact? Because I agree, you know, trying to get the councils, having been the leader of the council myself, to agree is like herding cats. But isn't this something where the mayor can use his strategic powers or his ability to encourage leaders to come together?
Well, we do have quite a lot of conversations about these sorts of issues. Will does quite a lot of work through London councils as well. I don't know whether you've got anything you wanted to add.
So just on the car club, I know, as Heidi said, specific ones do allow that one, single place to, rather than a return to the original place. So I know Zipcar that I think I'm a member. I know I'm a member of. You can drop it off in different places in terms of that approach. I think it is something that it might not best. As you said, it's quite difficult maybe to get everything across all London boroughs, which we've been doing on a raft of different projects in this space. But certainly we're beginning to see clusters of boroughs working together in these sort of areas, which would allow some of those journeys to benefit that way.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got on this section, so I've got Assembly Member Curtin, then Assembly Member Boff, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Yeah. Morning. Just a quick question. I mean, there are some places in outer London that are not particularly near any tube or train station. I'm thinking about places like Biggin Hill in South Bromley, and the Heathrow villages like Harmondsworth. Even though they're very near to Heathrow, there's not much of a public transport system, bus service, and Harefield, perhaps in the north of Hillingdon. What about places like that? What are you going to do to improve public transport in places like that, particularly maybe in evenings and weekends where bus services are less frequent?
So I think the first thing to say in answer to that question is that there's no one-size-fits-all strategy for every part of London, every borough. So clearly there's a differentiated approach to how you achieve the Mayor's transport strategy across London. And we do understand that if you're going to get to an 80% mode share target by 2041, then you're probably going to need to achieve a 95% walking, cycling, public transport mode share in central London to compensate for the fact that you won't be up at 80% in outer London. And so in that type of scenario, clearly there will be more journeys that are still done by motor vehicles. We would like those cars to be clean, to be less polluting than they are at the moment. We've also done 2 interesting trials in Sutton and Ealing recently on demand responsive buses, which are small buses which you can book either using an app on your phone or by phoning up, which won't pick you up from your door and take you directly to your destination, but would actually pick you up closer to where you are rather than walking to the closest bus stop, and within an area will serve journeys within that location. We're currently looking at the outcomes of those trials. So as I said, we did one in Sutton and we've got another one that's running over in Ealing. We will need to look at the extent to which those services would need to be subsidised and how that compares to the subsidy that we currently give to the bus network, which is a significant investment that we make, quite rightly. But we're looking at new forms of services to try and come up with a tailored approach so that all parts of London can actually move forward and make a contribution to realising this vision.
Okay, thank you.
Remember Boff?
Despite their contribution to reducing the need to use cars, car clubs still have to compete with other uses of car parking spaces according to the London plan. That is, if a development takes place and it has a certain number of car spaces, parking spaces allocated to it. Car clubs have to compete for those spaces rather than having any additionality. So don't you think that we should be actually allowing car clubs to have additional spaces over and above the allocation for new developments, rather than them having to compete with the very few spaces that are now being granted for cars in new developments?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I don't think so, would be my instinctive reaction to it. My understanding of the London plan is that it has, again, a sort of differentiated approach to its car parking standards for planning applications that are coming forward. So a development that is in central London, very close to public transport networks, may need to be totally car-free. And I know TfL officers often have lots of discussions with developers. I think of a time when I was out at Canada Water with one of Alex's colleagues, Lucinda Turner, talking to British Land about their car parking standards on that development. And Lucinda was doing a really good job of actually making the case as to why there should be a very, very low level of parking provision overall in that development, given its public transport connectivity. So I think that one of the ways in which we can start to shape the city is to ensure that in new developments we have very low levels of car parking provision overall. And so I don't necessarily think there should be additionality in the way that you suggest.
Okay, so that means that car clubs won't have no opportunity of growing.
I don't understand why you
Well,
would
if
say
they
that.
haven't got spaces that they can use, car clubs need allocated spaces, many of them.
Can I just say that the vast majority of car club spaces are on the public highway, and the boroughs control 95% of the road network. And I think
They're guided by the London plan.
Sorry, one of the issues we're trying to look at with the car club programme is to actually get more of it in outer London in particular, because I think what you've seen is a lot of these suppliers are very keen to invest in parking bays on the street in inner London, where car ownership is lower, where there is an attractive market for that. What we want is more of it to be spread to outer London. So there's a lot of work through London councils and the boroughs to try and extend the reach of them to outer London.
Nobody's denying that outer London is a different place from inner London and has different requirements. One more question. Well, when are we going to be free of diesel-emitting buses in London?
So there's been a huge programme of retrofit going on to make sure that the diesel buses are at least Euro 6 standard or better, and that programme will have completed for all of London's 9,500 buses by the end of this year. The objective that is set out in the Mayor's Transport Strategy is that the bus fleet would be zero emission by 2037. I think everyone recognises that date needs to come forward. It's a very expensive process to replace the whole of the bus fleet, and you need to do it in a way that actually makes sense given the investment that you will have made in buses in the last 10 years. You don't want to be writing off buses, for example, before the end of their useful life. And so you probably will have heard the Mayor make a statement committing to bringing London's buses up to a zero emission standard by 2030. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to get to that place.
So a child born this year will have to wait until their 17th birthday before they can stop breathing in diesel from the Mayor's buses.
I'm not sure you listened to the response that
I did.
I've just given. Okay,
You're saying 2037,
no,
hoping for
I also,
2030.
with respect to Assembly Member Boff, I also said you will have heard that the Mayor has said that we need to go faster than that. I was setting out what
Okay,
was
so what- by
contained
what
in the
date?
Mayor's Transport Strategy when it was written a number of years ago. And I'm also reflecting to you the comments that the Mayor has made in the last few weeks about his ambition to go further and faster when it comes to cleaning up
Okay,
the
so
bus
what's
fleet.
the date then? If 2037 isn't the date now, what is the date?
Well, as I've said to you, the Mayor has said that he wants to see the bus network zero emission by 2030.
By 2030. And he has plans in place to deliver that.
Well, what the work that Transport for London officers are doing, and have been doing sort of over the last couple of months is to look at how you can accelerate the progress towards the 2037 target that was set out in the Mayor's Transport Strategy. So you have to look at how you electrify the bus garages as one of the first steps. We've got 77 bus garages in London. One of them, Waterloo, is completely electric.
So
Another
why
10 have
why
a
have we
number
got
of...
2037 in the strategy if it's not going if it's not going to be the date? Is it just because it was printed then and now
So the
we
Mayor's
can't amend
Transport
it?
Strategy, as you will know, was developed 2 years ago, and I think it's totally right that as it becomes clearer that we need to move really rapidly to decarbonise our transport network, as technology has evolved with regard to batteries in double-deck electric vehicles, for example, which make up, double-deckers make up the vast majority of the fleet in London, that as circumstances change, it is appropriate for the Mayor of London to look at the targets that he has set in his strategies and to say, actually, I think we can be more ambitious as a city. And you will have heard him say that in the last few weeks.
No, I've heard him say it a lot, but I still see the 2037 date. That's the point. So,
Did you want me to say, it might be useful if I just say where we are in this, because shifting to a fully electric bus fleet is a Herculean task. It's a really big challenge in terms of the manufacturing industry, the electrical supply, the charging infrastructure as well, and the team in Surface Transport are on this and looking at it in every component of it. We have 280 fully electric buses on the roads at the moment. That is the largest electric bus fleet in Europe. In the business plan that was published in December, we will go to 2,000, which will make us even more ahead of the rest of any other European city. The issue that we have to look at in future business planning rounds is how we, as we've just talked about, how we accelerate that date further forward. But it is a huge technical challenge, and the team are fully mobilised in addressing that challenge.
it's been a Herculean task for small businesses to comply with the expanded ULEZ. And don't you think that bearing in mind that you've asked Londoners to do so much in order to comply with the Mayor's plans on air quality, don't you think Londoners will look at what the Mayor's rather lackadaisical approach to buses has been in getting them to comply? I mean, he's got a ridiculous target of 2037. He throws one of these dates out that's 2030. And we all know if it's not in the manifesto, Sadiq Khan doesn't actually believe it. So why, don't you think we need a bit more attention to ensuring that kids are not breathing in diesel fumes from London buses?
So,
and you're talking about 2030 now, so kids will
Can
have
I
to wait
just
until
be-
they're
can I-
10.
Okay.
Assembly, can I just
not
be,
Let's
good
just hear
enough,
from
is
Can I-
Mrs. Fox
can
and
I
Heidi,
just
and
be-
then we're
Not
going to
good
move
enough.
on.
can I just be totally clear with you that the entire bus fleet has been retrofitted, or there are new electric and some hydrogen buses on London's roads. So by the end of this year, every bus will be Euro 6 standard or better. Millions of pounds have been invested in retrofitting the buses to clean up the emissions from those buses, and that action has been taken immediately, and we're on target to reach all of that fleet being Euro 6 or better by the end of this year.
got your answer there. Thank you very much. Let's move on to safety on London's transport network, and Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Travel in London Report 12 sets out that in 2018 compared to 2017, the number of people who were killed on London's roads fell from 131 people in 2017 to 112 people in 2018. But the provisional figures for 2019 show that the road fatalities have actually increased and we're back in line with the earlier figures. So my question is, why do you think the numbers are going up? And first to Heidi, and maybe Will might want to come in as well.
So
Will might
you're
start
right.
with this one.
You know, 112 people were killed in 2018 and almost 4,000 people were seriously injured on our roads. We made very clear this is unacceptable. No death or serious injury should be considered inevitable, and that's why with the Metropolitan Police we've set out the plan in our Vision Zero document. And that aims to reduce the number of people who are being killed and seriously injured to 0 on our roads by 2041, which is an ambitious plan, but we should not have any other target other than 0 in terms of that. You're right, we are making progress. The number of people killed in 2018 was the lowest ever. The number of people walking was killed walking was also I think the lowest on record that year. The figures for 2019 are still provisional, and we are looking at those. I know in terms of cycling, the number that was in those provisional figures was people being killed was 5, which is the lowest on record. And I think if you look at the risk factors, the risk on any mode of transport is actually lower, has fallen across all of those modes of transport. But as I said, no one being killed or seriously injured is acceptable. You know, we can argue what's lowest, what's lower, what is. Ultimately, the difference between someone being seriously injured and being killed is often a matter of centimetres or seconds. Yeah. So we have to have this strategy, and year by year that varies. You know, you can look across the whole thing. You know, and I think discussing it on a year by year basis in terms of the number of fatalities isn't the way to look at this. We need to look at the whole package and what are we doing to move away to that to hit our target. And I think we have a phenomenally ambitious plan that is beginning to deliver. There are 4 strands, there are 4 pillars which sit behind our mode to drive this down to 0. One is our safer streets. How do we make our streets safer? That is the record investment in cycleways, in better crossings, in terms of fixing dangerous junctions, all of that side of things. Safer speeds is essential. We rolled out the 20 mile an hour on central London streets in the last couple of weeks, and the shift to driving from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour is phenomenal. If you're hit at driving by a driver driving 20 around the 30, you're 5 times more likely to survive. If you're over 60, you're 10 times more likely. So as we've got an ageing population, this has got to be part of that approach. So safer streets and enforcement of those safer streets is important, safer speeds. So safer streets, safer speeds, safer vehicles. We know that, for example, heavy goods vehicles are disproportionately dangerous on our roads. 4% of the road kilometres done, 60% of the cycling fatalities have been a result of heavy goods vehicles, 25% of pedestrian fatalities on London roads, heavy goods vehicles. We have to make our vehicles safer, and our direct vision standard is part of that process. Safer behaviour. Working with the police to do more enforcement on this is absolutely critical. And it does make a massive difference, not just in terms of the safety piece, but actually what the Metropolitan Police are finding is they do more stops for uninsured vehicles, for some of these speeding offences. They begin to capture drivers who are involved in other crimes. I think 65% of drivers who are uninsured are associated in other criminal activity. I went to a road the other week. I went down and saw we do a community road speed watch with kids in every borough across the city, and I went down to watch what that's actually like. And you get kids from a primary school, so it's driving behaviour change at that very early point outside their schools, trying to use the speed guns, and then the police stop them, and both the police and the kids intervene. We watched one little 7-year-old caught a car doing 27 miles an hour in a 20 zone. The police went to flag them down. The Range Rover slowed down. It went to stop, and then suddenly it shot off like a bullet. Yeah? We had an interceptor car around the corner, and the interceptor car chased the car. They eventually stopped it after a 20-minute police chase. Inside that car, there was a driver who was wanted for movement of stolen goods, had a weapon, and had drugs in the vehicle. Yeah? This approach, the police were saying this is happening every time they're doing speeds. So this is not just making our roads safer from the horrible crimes associated with speed, it's also it's taking criminals off our roads as well. So that 4 pillars of safer streets, safer speeds, safer vehicles, and safer behaviours is underpinning this whole approach. But the strategy only launched in 2017. Yeah? We're seeing that there is good progress. Yeah? I think that strategy is the right way to approach it. But there is an awful long way to go. DVS, for example, the Direct Vision Standard, has come in, but enforcement starts in October, which allows the industry to take up. I know that 15,000 permits have been issued so far in that period to make our trucks safer on the roads. It's going to take time. We need to bring people along with us on this. Driving the shift in terms of speed on our roads involves a cultural shift. Why those activities, like I mentioned, those kids out on the street, are so important in terms of bringing people along. There's a communications piece that's so vital in this, and how do we make sure that actually people are aware of this, that this is why it's so dangerous. So I think the numbers are still unacceptably high. Yeah? They are falling. The risk is falling across all modes of transport. But we need
Except
to do
they've
more.
just gone up.
Can I just
No, the
add
risks.
something?
So
Okay.
we've seen a massive growth in the amount of cycling, for example. So we've seen the highest growth in the number of kilometres cycled in London since records began in the last year. Yeah. As those numbers go up, yet the numbers fall, the risk associated with it is falling. But that's still not good enough. I don't want that risk to be there. So it's how do we continue to push that there?
Okay, and Heidi.
Add something. I think the first part of your question was specifically about the difference between the 2018 data for fatalities and the 2019 provisional data. It's a conversation that I've recently had with Stuart Reid about this issue, as you would expect me to.
Yep.
One of the things he has highlighted to me, he leads on Vision Zero within TfL, is that the number of acts of deliberate violence on our roads in 2019, the provisional data looks as if that accounts for 8 fatalities. That's higher than it was the previous year. And so what happened last year was that I think there were a number of non-typical events, is the way that Stuart would describe it. Now, somebody losing their life on London's roads, no matter how it happens, is, as Will has said, totally unacceptable. But I would be happy to provide you with a little bit more information on the basis of that conversation I had with Stuart Reid, if that would be
Right,
helpful.
so that sounds like it accounts for some of that change. Just digging in a bit more to the issue of vulnerable road users, because 78% of the fatalities in 2019 were vulnerable road users. So that is, I think there were 71 people who were walking, 25 people using power two-wheelers, and 5 people cycling were killed. And obviously Will has pointed out the huge numbers of people who are being very seriously injured as well. What are you doing particularly to reduce the risk to the people in that group? Because obviously we're seeing bigger and bigger cars. We're seeing have you got data on whether that is making a difference? And you were earlier talking about different things that you might bring into road pricing. Could there be higher charges for if some vehicles prove more risk to vulnerable road users? Could there even be higher charges brought in for big SUVs, for instance, being used on London's roads?
Across all of those 4 pillars, as I said, the speeds, the streets, the vehicles, and the enforcement, that is directly focusing on those vulnerable road users. You mentioned people walking, people cycling, people using powered two-wheelers. That's where we've seen significant falls over a long period of time, since 2005, significant falls in the number of people who are who have been killed and seriously injured in cars. Yeah, a lot of that is down to the technology within the cars. What we need to do, and our strategy is very much focused on those vulnerable road users. As I said, older people are at an increased risk. If they are hit by a speeding vehicle, they are more likely to be killed, which is something that is really alarming, and we've seen some of that through the statistics you mentioned. So addressing those vehicles, making it socially unacceptable to speed, like that has happened, the same as has happened with drink driving, for example, that has to be the approach going forward. So our whole Vision Zero initiative is about reducing those vulnerable road users' deaths and seriously injured. We're not there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but.
Do you, I mean, just in terms of raising that awareness about the consequences of poor driving behaviour and speeding, and do you think that there is more that TfL could be doing to recognise the deaths that happen? For instance, you know, should we at the Transport Committee have a report each month on the people who have been killed and seriously injured that month? Would that help to keep us all focused? And actually, we don't even know the names of many of these people, particularly the older pedestrians, and maybe that's because they don't have friends on social media, but it seems if we are going to get that kind of step change, and even, you know, the Commissioner, when he was before us in February, he said, I think there's still an awful lot more to do for people being killed and seriously injured on London's road network overall. And, you know, he said, you know, motorcyclists in particular is an area where we need to do more. So, you know, could there be things like that that actually change the culture around the way we think about these deaths and serious injuries?
Everyone has a role to play in this, and I think you can look at, if you look at the change that's happened, the sea change and the step change that's happened in cycling in London, and London has led the way in the country, has been around raising awareness and the hard work of a lot of campaigners. So campaigners, communities, councillors, assembly members, we all have a role to play. One of my frustrations in my job is that, rightly so, every time someone is killed on our roads as a cyclist, it usually appears in the newspapers. You know, usually in the Evening Standard, you can read about that. That's important. That is not the case with pedestrians. You know, the number of pedestrians being killed is far higher. And so this is something that we all have a role to play in terms of it doesn't get the same level of attention. But why is someone being killed as a pedestrian any less significant than someone being killed as a cyclist? So that piece, you know, I've started talking to some of the journalists about how that can be raised aware. One of them, Laura Laker, is doing a piece on nationally, I think, on terms of pedestrians being killed on pavements. Yeah. So raising awareness is a critical part of that. But we don't want to do it in a way that scares people. As I said before, the risk of people being killed on London roads is falling. It's fallen for pedestrians. It's fallen by 42%. The risk of being killed and seriously injured since the baseline of the work we work on. Similarly with cycling, that's fallen really significantly. So we need to make the case that actually this is not dangerous. Don't be afraid to walk and cycle. That would go against everything we're wanting to do in terms of the wider health outcome. So there's a balance between raising the awareness of people being hurt so that we can actually drive that culture of behaviour that needs to happen, but not to the point where we don't want to it needs to be proportionate to the risk that it has. So we don't want to make people feel like, oh, I'm too scared to walk or cycle and then retreat to their cars. So there is a balance with that, but I think that this, as you said, is a cultural shift and everybody has a role to play in that.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add one or 2 points to that, and you asked whether there is a way to, you know, humanise the stories of people that lose their lives on our roads. And a lot of people have asked whether, you know, we would name or publish names of people who have been killed. We need to deal with this really sensitively because the relatives and loved ones of people who, you know, do lose their lives, some of the time they don't want the media intrusion, they don't want that person's name to be out in the public domain, and so you have got to deal with this very sensitively. TfL has recently changed on, for example, its scorecard, which is the document that monitors the way that the organisation is performing against its objectives. We've actually moved from talking about a percentage reduction in the numbers of people killed and seriously injured to actually talking about numbers, real numbers of people, and we know that behind every one of those numbers is a mother, father, daughter, son. And there was quite a discussion about whether we should do that, because actually if you say we want to see 289 fewer people killed and seriously injured on London's roads, the obvious question is, well, the only acceptable number is 0. Yes. But I do think that signifies a cultural change in the organisation.
Yes.
About being totally explicit about, you know, these are real people's lives. And the last thing I'd say is that we have in the last year done an advertising campaign where we've run adverts on television as well as in cinemas. You will have seen it on the poster sites around the TfL network. It's quite unusual for TfL to do paid television advertising because it doesn't come cheap. But the whole campaign has been, you know, watch your speed, others do. And it's about making people think about, you know, their children in the back of the car when perhaps, you know, someone's rushing to get to something that they're late for. And I think it's quite a hard-hitting and powerful message. And so the organisation is doing a lot to try and humanise this whole issue, because I think that's the way you start to get this cultural shift where it becomes totally unacceptable in the way that drink driving now is.
And so are you confident that you can meet the actual sort of overall target to get the 65% reduction in the numbers of people killed and seriously injured against the baseline?
We've got a lot of hard work to do, and this is in a whole range of areas, as Will has said. One of the things we haven't touched on, Will's talked about the direct vision standard, the work on improving the infrastructure in London for cyclists in particular, safer junctions. We've also got all the work we're doing on the bus network around the bus safety standard.
The buses are coming up in the
next
member will be asking about buses, so I'm going to move you swiftly on.
Caroline, can I just come in on that? This change is not going to be a linear change. Yeah. So to sort of say we launched a strategy in 2017, yeah, which I think Anne is continuing to learn from best practice from around the world. I know colleagues were in Stockholm, which is recognised as the world leader in terms of Vision Zero, continuing to learn and adapt to that. But it takes time for some of these policies to kick in, yeah, to see those things. So it isn't going to be linear. And again, just like the mode share change, is not going to be linear. So are we on track? I think we can get to that target. We have to get to that target. We shouldn't have another target, and that's what we need to work towards. Is it challenging? Yes. Can we do it alone? No. We need to be working with boroughs. We need to be working with the public. We need to be working with communities to deliver that, and that's the way we'll hit the target.
And are you finding that making the case through Vision Zero is helping with getting that collaboration that Heidi was talking about earlier with boroughs to make those changes on our streets, so we get the safer, more efficient crossings, the protected space for cycling? Are you finding Vision Zero is helping you to make that case?
Yes, in a lot of cases, not everywhere. But I think that with all of these, the benefits of the Healthy Streets agenda is we need to reduce that road danger and make it safer for people. But the benefits go far beyond that. So pinning all the arguments down to just road danger is not the way to do this. You know, the economic benefits that I touched on before, the health benefits in terms of more people being physically active, the air quality benefits, the congestion, just the fact it's a fun and nice thing to do is a useful way of doing it. So that whole package of benefits that come from people being more active, using that sustainable mode of transport, have to be made. Now, Vision Zero and the number of collisions, the number of casualties, the number of people being killed on the road is very powerful. But again, it's only part of the benefits. The fact that over 9,500 people die prematurely due to invisible air, you know, the invisible toxic air, the fact that we've got that number of inactivity, those are less stark figures, but they are big public health concerns. The inactivity crisis is, as I said, a ticking time bomb for the health service. So we need to package all of that together, but the Vision Zero is a very important part of that narrative of why we need to change how people are moving around our city.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to talk about safer junctions. Now, you talked about how you've met the London cycling campaign's tripling pledge in terms of tripling the amount of protected cycling routes. There was another LCC pledge at the same time, which was that every remaining junction would be brought to consultation with detailed designs during this mayoral term. Now, at the launch of the Safer Junctions programme, you said that it's vital that we target the most dangerous junctions across London if we're going to improve our roads for people walking and cycling. So, to what extent do you think you've achieved this, and what are the challenges that you face on it?
So 31 of the 73 junctions on that list have been delivered, and I went down to see the most recent one the day before yesterday at Rotherhithe Roundabout, which I'd encourage everyone to look, delivered 5 weeks early, and looking fantastic. The works have started on a further 10 of those, and those will be complete this spring. So we're on track to deliver what we committed to in terms of 41 of those safer junctions. The impact of that has been seen a decrease in collisions across the board. It varies according to which junction. Some, I think St George's Circus, you've seen a reduction of 60% in collisions at that site. So we're seeing that the programme is working. We're delivering according to the targets that we set out. The next phase of those junctions, a lot of those, and I think this is a learning process. I keep emphasising that we have to keep ahead of ourselves on this. I think for the Safer Junctions programme, and I've made this case to both of you, and I've now spoken to colleagues as well as the Mayor and Heidi about this, in terms of how do we continue to learn from this? How do we review this, keep it going? And we are learning lessons. So I think we do need to embed, and I think this committee suggested looking at embedding a risk-focused approach on this, so that there are some junctions in London where you don't see many cycling collisions, because quite frankly it's too dangerous and too unsafe to even go near it on a bicycle. So we need to be factoring a risk in proportion of that. We need to be focusing, in some cases, on a single junction that might be on that list. Might just shift the problem slightly further up the road. Yeah? So there are cases where you need to begin to look at a corridor or an area-wide approach. Maybe you can't solve all the immense challenges to make a junction safer within 50 square metres of tarmac. That is a very significant problem when you've got the levels of traffic and the different needs of our roads. So that's where we need to look at a more area-wide approach to tackling some of these. And also, the Safer Junction scheme is only looking at those roads the 5% of roads that the Mayor is responsible for, the TLRN. Making the information and providing that information to the boroughs is really important in terms of how this programme develops. So we are continuing to roll out at pace. The next 27 junctions on that list that I mentioned are part of bigger schemes for that point that I just made, that looking them all in isolation is not always possible. And we are continuing to evolve what that programme will look like and continue to do as we move forward. You mentioned what are the biggest barriers. I think sometimes there are barriers around the neighbouring boroughs. So if you do something significant at a junction, then we can face problems with traffic, or fears that traffic will disperse onto residential roads. So one of the approaches that we're taking to look at that is to work with the boroughs. You'll know, many of you will be familiar with Streatham, a road in Streatham which we're looking at the moment. That's a TRN road which we're putting in, but actually we're working with Lambeth to surround that, to show that we can make these safer, we can make that much safer pedestrians and cyclists there, but by working together as a low traffic neighbourhood that sits alongside that, it reduces the rat running and the potential congestion and road danger and air quality issues that residents are facing in their area at the moment. So combining those two processes has got to be part of the way that we deliver things going forward.
Now, TfL's latest draft business plan includes funding for what the Mayor has referred to as more far-reaching schemes to tackle some of our riskiest roads. Are these going to be more things happening? Are you thinking about doing more in outer London? Because certainly the outer London big main roads are a huge barrier to people getting out of their cars, and that does seem to be somewhere where more is needed?
Yeah, there's we have to prioritise. As you know, there are limited funds for this. So how do we focus on that? And the way that we've done that is very much through anyone who knows me will know my love of data and my love of evidence. That it's not a computer says yes or no model, but it has to be informed by that. And so the strategic cycling analysis provides the framework for where we are providing the biggest investment. Now that's based on the potential for more cycling. We've recently put out this walking equivalent of that, of where is there the potential for more walking in London. That's not a network of long distance walking routes. That is much more of a sort of focus on town centres and those sort of areas. So using those tools that we've got available, we are looking at how do we change things in outer London. So we've just gone out for consultation on the route from Charlton to Woolwich as the first phase of that expansion. That is a scheme that is not just focusing on cycling, as maybe previous administration might have done. That's including walking, but it also includes new bus lanes. Yeah. So it is actually making it a better journey for people walking, for people cycling, and people using public transport in an area where we're seeing massive growth and future growth in terms of that population. So that is part of our plan to continue to roll that out, not through the lens of a single mode, but actually that walking, cycling, and public transport. And only by that will we hit our 80% target going forward.
Finally, I just want to talk a little bit more about speed limits and reducing speeds, because that's obviously a significant way to reduce the likelihood of severity of outcome if a collision happens. So what measures will you be introducing to monitor and achieve compliance with 20 mph speed limits on the Transport for Road network in central London?
You go first.
I'll start. So in central London, you'll know that we've put in place a whole range of physical measures in different locations within the central London area. And we chose those locations because it was where there was a sort of pattern of collisions happening. Over the course, all the cameras have been recalibrated so that if someone is exceeding the 20 mile per hour speed limit, there will be enforcement of that, and that we're working with the police on tailored enforcement around that as well. We, over the course of the next year, we will be reviewing the number of collisions that happen. We want to look at the impact that it's had on speeds, average speeds. We are particularly interested, I think, in looking at what happens at night time as well, when it's dark, when some horrific collisions happen. And we haven't ruled out if the physical measures that we've put in place are not sufficient to, make a significant impact, then we will go back and potentially do more.
You talk about physical measures. What are you?
So things such as raised tables to physically slow down the traffic.
Is this on? Are you doing this on the TLRN?
Yes, we've done it already.
Yes.
So on bus routes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And is that having an impact?
So this is what went live. So it went live last week. So the physical measures have been installed over the last couple of months, and the 20 mile per hour speed limit in the central zone went live last week. We've also got a plan to roll out 20 mile per hour speed limits to other roads which are part of the TLRN. In parts of inner and outer London, and I think the plan, but will correct me if I'm wrong, is to do 140 kilometres.
140 kilometres over the next 4 years, which will be looking at prioritising. So there are bits of London which become horribly confusing, where you've got borough speeds that are 20 miles an hour and TfL roads that are 30 miles an hour. They can be on high streets and a raft of others. So we're targeting exactly where works, because it's from everybody's perspective, nobody knows which road. Most people outside of this room and beyond don't know which road is a TfL road and which one isn't. There needs to be some consistency there, but it also needs to be a risk and a risk-led approach. So high streets, big shopping spaces, you don't want those to be 30 miles an hour where you've got that. So that's part of that rollout. I want to touch on how important this collaboration with the Metropolitan Police is for your point around the monitoring. From April, there will be a new speed enforcement team within the Met, which will be identifying those speeding drivers across the capital, including those 20-mile-an-hour zones in central London. That's going to be deployed where there are known high-risk areas for speeding. Responding to stakeholder concerns, community concerns, where people are recognising their problem and where the data shows there are problems with speeding. As I said, and I mentioned earlier in that example with my the 7-year-old girl that I was with who stopped that thing, the benefits, the way that the police team are talking about it to me is that we are policing speeding, but we're also thinking crime on this. Yeah, that this is a very, very powerful way of actually taking criminals off the road, because those people who are associated with other, involved in other crimes and other serious crimes, not saying that speeding isn't a serious crime, but other serious crimes, are more likely, according to the Metropolitan Police, to break some of the traffic rules in terms of speeding, in terms of insured vehicles. So this is a mechanism of achieving wider police outcomes, as well as making the very serious point about reducing speed in central London. So I very much welcome this partnership with the Met, and that's why Vision Zero is a joint programme.
And do you see that 20 mph rolling out more widely across other parts of London? Because 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, obviously they help people in central London, but there are people in outer London who are walking along very hostile roads that actually have pavements, that have a lot of people walking along them. So do you anticipate that you'll actually want to roll it out further?
Yeah, that's the 140 kilometre figure that we've just talked about. So
but 140 kilometres, what percentage is that of the TfL network?
I would need to check.
I don't know the exact percentage, but I know that this is also, I think, also factoring this, you've got to look at what the boroughs are doing as well. So there have been, I can't remember the exact amount, but I know it's well over, I think it's around 300 kilometres of borough roads that have gone to 20 miles an hour in the last couple of years, and I could give you the exact figures on that, so please don't quote me on that. But that's beginning to show how, again, this is boroughs working together to do that. So a lot of those outer London boroughs are down to the roads, and quite frankly, not all the roads are appropriate for being 20 miles an hour. If people, it's got to be what works for that area, and what is sensible to reduce the road danger in those areas. So that's got to be the approach to take going forward, working with the boroughs, with TfL, to deliver this in a sensible way to save lives.
Yep.
We've got some really good maps on the extent of 20 miles per limits around London, and also the programme that we're implementing in the TLN. I think it's probably useful if we send you those maps.
Send those over, yes. And I can see you're trying to do the maths in your head of 140 out of whatever the network is. Perhaps we'll get that detail in writing. Great, thank you. Still focusing on safety, our final section is on buses, and you also wanted to come in on something else.
If I could just come on a bit on the earlier thing, and we'd move on to buses, if that's all right, Chair. Will, I know it's not necessarily your area, but you said you had a head for stats. So do you roughly know how much we've spent on making roads safer for push bikes over the last 3 or 4 years?
Push bikes?
Yeah.
We're spending record amounts. So it's not just... So I come back to my original answer. The question raising earlier was that this is not just about cycling. The Healthy Streets budget is about walking, cycling and public transport. But that isn't that all... When we're talking about Vision Zero, we're talking about vulnerable road users, which includes powered two-wheelers. So, for example, very sadly, I think the indicative figures from last year show that 32 people were killed using motorbikes in London, which is an increase of 10 from the previous year.
Yeah, it's fair.
So that is a
50% increase, basically.
It is a significant challenge, and I think we've got to recognise that powered two-wheelers are a vulnerable road user group in terms of that space. So the Healthy Streets budget is not just about cycling, or push bikes or whatever. It is about all those different modes.
See, that's a good point. That you've seen a 50% increase in motorcycle deaths. Now, a lot of the money that you're spending on keeping cyclists safe, and that's fair enough, means actually you're reducing the amount of road space for motorcyclists. And I would put it to you that actually this increase in the deaths in motorcycles is as a consequence of some of the work that you're doing to make the road space safer for cyclists, because with less room for motorcyclists, you make them more vulnerable.
I would totally reject that. I think one where there's still carriageways. We're not prohibiting, or in any way, there's still plenty of space. If you can fit a truck down the road, you can fit a motorcycle down the road very safely.
Have you ridden a motorcycle?
Yes, I have.
Both
with a sidecar.
Have you experienced the difference it is if the motorcycle is allowed to use the bus lane and when the motorcycle isn't allowed to use the bus lane, and the extra risks that are incurred?
I actually haven't ridden a motorcycle in London, so I haven't done that in
I've got one downstairs you can have a go on.
Thank you, that's very kind. I might look forward to that. Maybe as a pillion, given the fact you're more experienced, would be good.
I wouldn't be a pillion on the back of my bike.
I don't.
But then my wife does.
But I do think I think that the road space we're not affecting the amount of the space for. There is still sufficient space and it adheres to all the standards for motorcycles. But I do think there's a systemic problem with motorcycle safety in this country. I think there is a challenge in terms of the amount of training that's required and the licensing in terms of this. We know that 28% of motorcycle fatalities, or the number of, I think it's 19. I've seen 19% of motorcycle fatalities have involved drivers with less than 1 year of riding experience. And I know personally that it doesn't take an awful lot to get an L plate on the back of a 50cc moped, to go out on
or a 125
on a 125 even on the street. So I think this is a systemic thing that needs to be addressed from a DFT perspective, of actually instilling more of a culture of better training and better licensing, so that there is more experience required for motorcyclists, which are particularly for young people, from BAME communities. There's a huge problem there, so which is one of the reasons why we are lobbying central government for more of that. I think in 2016, central government did say that they would go out with a consultation on looking at some of this. So I'm not quite sure where that is, but there needs to be that concerted action. In the meantime, we can't just sit back and wait for that action from central government. And TfL is delivering training courses, make new free educational initiatives aimed at less experienced new drivers. Those need to continue. And we, as part of our design criteria for all the roads, will continue to apply the guidance from the Urban Motorcycle Design Handbook that's accepted, that takes place on all TfL schemes.
But surely you could find some money in your budget to do this training. I agree with you. Not completely, because actually the other very vulnerable group are my group, which are returners.
So maybe I'll take my offer back on going on the back of your
case. Who, once we used to ride bikes a lot, and then I've returned over the last couple of years now, actually, coming up 2 years. And it's very different. The roads are very different to what they were when I learnt to ride. The power of the bikes are very different. And of course, one's reaction times are very different to what they used to be.
I'm not going to comment on that bit, Keith.
And so we do find that a lot of the injuries are what we call returners. Yes. And they're the people who think they can ride, and they're the people actually we need to talk to. And cannot TfL do some kind of educational program for those people? Because they've done, well, I mean, I never did a CBT, they hadn't invented it when I passed my test, but I would actually welcome doing a CBT, but I don't have to.
I know that the programmes existing at the moment are largely targeted at those less experienced drivers and those new riders. Let me take that away and talk to the team about that, because I know that people coming to this late in life may be getting on a very powerful bike that they could afford now is very different from riding a 50 or a 125.
Yeah, okay. I just want to ask you one more thing about, just make a comment on the emerging issues. And I'm actually, can I give way in a minute to...
Yes, so I just wanted to get some clarity before you do buses.
Before I do buses. But two things. We've got electric push bikes now, haven't we? And we're going to get scooters by the looks of it. What have TfL done in preparation for that? Are we going to let these electric bikes and scooters, electric push bikes and scooters go on bus lanes, or are we going to ban them from bus lanes, or are they going to be able to use the super cycle highways, whatever they are, all those sort of things?
So there's a difference in law and in terms of operation between the electric assisted bikes, the e-bikes, which are, if you've tried one, and I'd really recommend trying one, they're not full electric bikes. It's not like you sit on the bike and you do nothing. It's sort of, it assists you on hills, it assists you on longer distances.
I need assistance now.
Well, they're phenomenal. What we see is it targets a different group. It's becoming very popular, but they're capped legally. They're illegal. The amount of power that those things have is capped. There are all sorts of regulations around the e-assist bikes. Things we find with that is that people using them are cycling twice as far. They still get 80% of the health benefits out of that. And essentially, they are legally classified as bicycles, and therefore come under those regulations. So I'm very welcoming, very supportive of those bikes, as long as they are not, they adhere to those legal frameworks. So to buy them in the UK, they need to adhere to that. Electric scooters are something different. They are classified in a different way according to the regulations and the guidance. And I think that they do pose a challenge because they are new, and there aren't the regulations. So at the moment, there is no cap on the speed limit. You can do up to 52 kilometers an hour on one of these things. I was I was cycling home up Tower Hill the other day, and a guy pulled up on one of these things and shot off ahead of me. I could never do that going downhill, let alone going uphill on a normal bicycle. So there's an issue over the fact that these are not capped. There's no speed limits. There's no defined issues around lighting. There's no defined issues around the size of the wheels, for example, and the materials and those sort of things. So, and one of the challenges is that they are illegal to be ridden on public roads. They can. There is,
if I can just cut across you, that you know, the government's made it clear that they're looking at this issue. Have TfL put forward all those points you're making? And
yes. So TfL are really engaged with this, with the Department for Education. I know there have been some joint visits to look at schemes happening in Paris, and I think there's one coming up from Berlin with TfL and DFT.
There's a good scheme in Brussels. I use it all the time.
And I think that there is a from the TfL perspective is if central government change those rules, which is a big if, and what those rules might be in terms of legislation, there are some key things that we need. We need them to be safe. We need guidance, and we need that to be applied in terms of what's being sold in the country. But we also, as a city, need the power to license dockless operators. So if you all see cities around the world, there's been a proliferation of dockless scooters cluttering up the pavements, which for people with visual impairments, for people with buggies, mobility aids, it becomes a real challenge. So we need the powers, which we don't have at the moment. If that's to become legal, we need the powers to be able to license, to manage that in a way that works for London, that doesn't actually challenge all the vulnerable road users that we've got. So I think that is something that we are pushing, and I've mentioned to ministers in my meetings, and will continue to push for that safety and the control of those schemes.
Yeah, we need the power to limit the numbers as well. We need the power to license, but also to cap.
No,
because otherwise
I agree with that.
We don't want to be overrun.
But as the government are looking at these scooters, we know they're looking, you're engaging with them. Are you taking that opportunity to get, because it'll take a piece of a bit of primary legislation, are you taking the opportunity to say to the government, yes, scooters is an issue, but actually we've still got an issue with rickshaws, we've still got an issue with PHVs, and could you actually use that particular piece of time to Heidi would understand it's more than most, bolt that onto that piece of legislation? Are you taking that opportunity? Are you engaging with government over that?
Yes, to both of those. I'm not quite sure, and Heidi will know better, if you can bolt those onto the same bit of legislation, but that is consistently some of the things that we're asking for central government.
I think we are some way away still from legislation. The government have sought views informally, which TfL fed back on. I can't remember whether they've recently announced a consultation coming up or whether that's live, but then there would be a process by which legislation would have to come forward. If that was primary legislation, you could of course amend it, and one of the issues that we did raise with the Secretary of State when he took up post in the summer of last year, in the first meeting between the Mayor and the Secretary of State, we talked about the issue of pedicabs and the fact that they are the only form of transport in London that is unregulated. We know that there are some quite rip-off fares that people are charged on these pedicabs. There's questions around safety. And so that was a matter that we did raise with the Secretary of State when we saw him last August.
Because there are loads of other areas as well, like even on-demand taxis and stuff like that, where we just don't have the legislation. And I would like to see a situation where London, or the Mayor, is given the powers to introduce bylaws on, because we can't predict what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years around transport. But if the legislation could empower, say, the Mayor of London, but also the heads of the different counties to actually have the ability to pass bylaws rather than having to rely on primary legislation, which is a very difficult thing to do.
I agree very much on that, and I'll give you an example of one of the challenges we've had is dockless push bikes. You'll be aware of the proliferation of dockless push bikes, and again, we don't have the powers to properly regulate, enforce, and manage that on our streets, hence them being scattered in different places. We don't have the powers to create that bylaw, but there are ways. It shows how hard we've worked is using some legislation through London councils, of getting all the councils to agree around this. I think it's based on use of space that was initially purposed for fairgrounds and fish ponds. But using that legal framework, we've now got a bylaw in draft that's going through through London councils to say, could we look at sort of virtual docking stations for those dockless bikes, so that you could end up saying, well, this is an area where we were happy for those to be placed. So the Highway Authority, whether it's the Borough of Havering or if it's TfL, could say, this is where we want them. But that's taken it's taken 2.5 years, and we still don't have it because of that lack of power. We can do our best to work around them to respond to the change, but we need more of that power to be able to respond.
That's what they do in Brussels. You can't just abandon your scooter anywhere in Brussels. You have to park it sensibly and actually demand a photograph if they're not happy where you've left it. So that's something we could do. Just moving quickly on then, and I'll be
move on to
done.
Bus safety, because we've got two more sections after
just
this.
Very quickly on 20 mile per hour site, 20 miles per hour. It's not something I necessarily agree with, but I'm not going to go through the story on that. Just to say, Will, you made a very, very good point. I think you made the point too, Heidi, actually, that it is now very confusing in London as a road user as to whether you're in a 30 mile an hour limit or a 20 mile an hour limit. Could I just ask that when it comes to the 20 mile an hour limit roads, that there's a lot of repeat signage on the road so that you know that you're in a 20 mile per hour speed limit?
Yeah, agreed. Signage has got to be part of that strategy, and it is part of that strategy. So
just having one 20 mile an hour sign up.
Yeah.
He's not right. That'll do it.
Okay. No, he doesn't want to come in anymore. So buses,
right,
please.
Okay. Bless you. Bless you. Right. So moving on to buses now. Right. So for Q3 2019, TfL's reported that incidents that caused a serious or fatal injury involving a London bus have increased by 15% when compared with the same period last year. What changes need to be made in order to see this number decrease?
Okay, so there are a number of changes that we're making with regard to bus safety. One of them is making the vehicles safer. We introduced the bus safety standard, the first phase of that, back in 2019, and there are further iterations that are coming. We also need to tackle the issue of fatigue amongst bus drivers. You will have seen the report that was published last year, done by Loughborough University and the Swedish Road Safety Institute, that looked at the levels of fatigue that the bus driver population experience. One of the things that as soon as we got that report, we have said we will mandate is that going forward, every operator who bids to run a bus contract in London must demonstrate that they have a robust fatigue risk management system in place. We've also set up a £500,000 fund for bus operators to bid into, to look at how they can come up with new ideas, new innovations about tackling that issue of fatigue. We've been rolling out training to bus drivers as well, Destination Zero training, which involves a virtual reality headset, trying to just get the drivers themselves to think about you know, their own personal health and well-being, their sleep patterns, but you know, this really, really has to be driven by the bus operators with TfL to make sure that we're looking at all of the things that lead to collisions happening on the network. I can talk for a long time if you want about things such as the bus safety standard. You know, some of those things involve new technology to increase visibility from the seat that the bus driver sits in. Other things will be looking at new standards around the interior of the bus to try and tackle the issue around slips, trips and falls that happen on the buses. And so they're under Claire Mann's leadership, who's the Director of Bus Operations, there really is a whole load of work going on in TfL to tackle this. What I would just like to say, though, is that if you do look at the data, I believe we are going in the right direction here because, you know, if you look at 2018 as an example, the number of people who were killed or seriously injured in collisions involving a bus in London fell by 8% compared to 2017, and that equates to a 59% reduction on the 2000 to 5/9 baseline that we monitor against. And I've had a look at the most provisional figures for 2019 as well, and that shows that the numbers of people killed and seriously injured in a collision with a bus in that year fell by 9% on 2018. So I think the figures that you quoted at me were probably one quarter. If you look at those years, and as I say, those figures are provisional, we are going in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. The Mayor said that bus operating companies are best placed to undertake investigations into their incidents. Given the increase in serious or fatal injury involving London buses, is this still the case? But can I also add to that, that if you do have the misfortune to be in an incident with a bus, you have to go via TfL, which causes a long delay and often leads to the recordings that are made by the buses having been wiped by the time it gets investigated.
Okay, so I think there are a number of issues there that you've raised. I think it is right that the operator leads upon the investigation, but where a fatality occurs as a result of a collision with a bus, a senior member of TfL staff would actually go out and, you know, I think it's called the Go Look See process that has been instituted in the last couple of years to actually understand whether there are any immediate things that need to be tackled with regard to how that incident came about. So whilst the lead responsibility sits rightly with the operator, please don't think in those most serious of collisions that senior TfL staff aren't involved in reviewing what has happened, because that's not the case. You've asked about the process. I think you were referring to the ability to get CCTV, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly when incidents happen on the bus network, it is important for TfL to be aware of incidents. I'm quite happy to take away this question about how long it takes in order to, you know, get hold of CCTV. I don't know whether Alex knows anything about this. It's probably not his area of responsibility, but I'm happy to take that away and speak to officers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because that is an issue, and the when I put a similar question to the Commissioner, he said that doesn't happen, but I can actually give you examples of where that has happened, and I'm sure he's aware of them. But anyway, moving on, under the current contracts that TfL have with the bus operators, there are targets for achieving delivery, i.e. getting to the destinations at the right time, but there are no targets around safety. in fact, the contract really does encourage buses to speed up. If they're getting a bit behind, the contract encourages them to speed up to try and make up the time so they actually meet those targets. Do you think that's a sensible thing to have in this modern day and age?
So I think there's a slight misunderstanding of the way that the contracts are actually structured, and if you'd like to sit down with Claire or somebody like Tom Cunnington in her team and talk through this in detail, then I'm quite happy to get that set up for you. I think you're probably referring to what is sometimes described as headway, which is the distance between buses on the route. I don't think, and I'm persuaded of the argument that is put forward by TfL officers on this, that you shouldn't put safety performance elements into the bus contract specifically in terms of targets.
Sorry, Heidi, could you just say that again? Could you just say that again?
So you're asking me, as I understand your question, whether we should contractually incentivise safety.
Yes.
And I don't believe we should do that. I think we should make it a requirement, as we will do from this summer, that any operator bidding for a contract should have a robust fatigue management process in place. Right. What I'm concerned about is the underreporting of safety incidents. Yeah. And I think this is a reasonable argument that TfL officers put forward. You need to establish a culture of openness and transparency. The work that Claire has led around the bus safety performance index, the assurance reviews that the team do with the bus operators on a quarterly basis, where they go in and actually look at the data about what's happening. They review the response of the operators to different incidents. They talk broadly about the culture, because it is important. If we think about some of the learnings we had from the Sandilands incident, I know that the Transport Committee had Jackie Townsend here, I think from First Group, where she talked about some of the changes that she's made to ensure that drivers of trams, for example, feel that they can raise issues that they're concerned about with the management at the tram depot, but in a bus case it would be at the bus garage. And I actually think that fundamental shift in changing culture around safety is really critical. And so I think it's quite a sophisticated approach that TfL are taking to improving safety. It's got a lot of different elements of activity that are being worked upon, but I don't think simply putting safety targets in contracts would yield the right outcomes.
Okay, thank you. As you probably know, I mean, we went down to Arriva bus garage, didn't we, to see those What's It I things?
Yes, we did, yes.
I can't remember, what was it called? Something I, wasn't it?
Yes. Mobileye.
What you're talking
Mobileye, yeah. So just for the public watching, Mobileye is a system that gives the bus greater vision, also alerts the driver of obstacles, pedestrians, push bikes and so on, motorcycles. And Arriva found to be fair, the test was funded by TfL. Arriva found it to be very successful. I believe they're now introducing that across their fleet. It's reduced accidents and so on and so forth. Why are TfL not now asking this system to be adopted by all the contractors, all the bus providers?
I would need to check the latest on that with the Director of Bus Operations and come back to you.
All right, okay. The Mayor committed to put... Bless you. The Mayor committed to put intelligent speed adaptation on every London bus by 2021-22. However, in February, the TfL Commission confirmed to this committee that this won't happen now until 2024. Can you tell us why there's been this delay in what is a very sensible piece of equipment?
So, my understanding of this situation is that we've now got intelligent speed assistance on over 1,000 buses on London's network. And as of the end of 2019, I believe I'm right in saying that all new buses that come into London's fleet must have it, and it's part of the bus safety standard. I think there have been some delays in the rollout of ISA, partly because I think that initially it was intended that the rollout of ISA on buses would be part of the iBus upgrade, and there have been some technical problems with that, and that has proven not to be possible. So instead of having that as an integrated programme, you're having to now take out the rollout of ISA and do it independently. What I have been told is that in the meantime, TfL have been developing a speed compliance tool, and I think this was piloted last summer with one of the operators, and they're able then to sort of monitor in real time the speed that the buses are doing. And this pilot showed some quite interesting results and really positive results, because this speed compliance tool, when it was introduced, has resulted in a 47% rather decrease in speeding. And that speed compliance tool, as I understand it, is being rolled out across the network. So just because the heavens have opened.
Yes.
I think it is rain anyway. Just because ISA is not on all of the buses, please rest assured that there's some other technical stuff that is on the buses and is being rolled out, which will enable us to have a much better grip on that issue of speeding.
In areas, I mean, I've got a particular part in my constituency where residents are complaining about the buses speeding. Would it be able to ensure that those buses are fitted with, or that the buses that ply that route have this speed compliance tool?
If you provide me with the details of that route, I will find out where in the rollout programme that route lies.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Finally, I think we can go with just roughly how many buses now need to have this technology installed? Do you know?
I think it's over 1,000.
Over
11. Alex tells me 1,100.
Yep. As of 3rd of February 2020, fewer than a third of bus drivers have completed the Destination Zero safety training. What is being done to increase that figure, and what contingency plans are there in place to support attendance?
So I think attendance has been good, and certainly the feedback that we've had on the course when it's done has been outstanding. And I think it's something like 95% of people that do it come back and say, actually, it was excellent and it's really, really helpful. The programme that we have in place is to ensure that all the drivers complete this training by December of this year. So we are moving at pace to ensure that all of the drivers have done the training by the end of the year. And I think you said, and I think you're right, your figures are right, about a third of drivers have done it at the moment.
But by the end of the year, all drivers will have completed the course.
Yeah.
Because I think we all agree that it's a good scheme, so we want to get as many through it as quickly as possible, don't we? Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Right, members, let's a little bit more pace, I think, on the final two sections, as it's already midday. Section 4, funding and the government spending review. Right, Assembly Member Curtin, you're going to lead off.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon. It is afternoon now.
Yes.
So, just a couple of questions on the sort of funding scheme and commitments you have in the Mayor's Transport Strategy for capital expenditure. Now, it looks like it's divided into 5-year sections. So in year 1 to 5, from the graph I've got in front of me, it looks as though you have £11 billion planned, but then in years 6 to 10 that goes up to 25 billion, and years 11 to 15 up to 42 billion. So there seems to be a ramping up of the commitments in the capital expenditure programme, which doesn't have sort of allocated funding to it. So I've really got two questions on that. How are you going to be able to fund all these commitments in your capital programme? And why is there a big increase in the first 5 years, second and third 5 years?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're asking me how we fund the pipeline of capital infrastructure that needs to be delivered over the course of the next 2 decades, and why is it that there's more expenditure in the sort of last decade of that, essentially. So I think the first point to make is that there's a fundamental difference between the business plan that TfL publishes every year, which covers a 5-year period, where it has a whole series of funded schemes within it. That includes such things as I referred to earlier, the £1.5 billion contract for the new Piccadilly line trains, the new fleet of DLR trains, the extensions, Northern Line extension, Barking Riverside extension. And then we are working on a whole series of schemes that if you're going to achieve the Mayor's transport strategy, you need to do in order to reach that mode shift target. And some of those schemes are very, very significant in terms of public transport infrastructure. So Crossrail 2 is a huge scheme that runs from Surrey in the southwest up to Hertfordshire to the northeast of London, would unlock about 200,000 homes. You've got the Bakerloo line extension, you've got the DLR to Thamesmead, West London Orbital. All of these are still at a relatively early stage of planning. We need to have some pretty urgent discussions now that the government have announced their CSR dates in the budget yesterday, to talk both about the things we would like to do in the next 5 years but are currently can't afford to do, such as renewing the Piccadilly line signalling, which would give you a big overall capacity enhancement to go alongside the new trains. We need to replace the trains on the Bakerloo line as well. Those trains started running before I was born, and I've said to people recently I've got enough grey hair to prove to people that that's quite a significant problem. And so we've got no certainty of capital funding beyond March of next year. And what you have to understand is that since 2010, the non-fare income that TfL gets has reduced by 40%. In my view, TfL in the last few years has been dealing with the austerity that has been inflicted upon local government since 2010. And this is going to cause a real problem if the government don't invest in the next generation of London's transport projects. Now, I totally agree that transport infrastructure elsewhere in the country needs an urgent injection of funding. But you can't solve that problem by taking away from London, in effect. And I think there is a sense that London's transport network is taken for granted. And so, we've got to find a way, and I'd welcome the support of the Assembly in doing this, to get significant funding into London's transport system in this CSR process and beyond that. Now, that may come in the form of government grants. It may be grant for specific schemes. We've made the case that they should return the direct operating subsidy to TfL, which is worth £700 million a year. If they don't want to do that, then give us money to do the Piccadilly line signalling. If they don't want to do that, then let's have a conversation about further fiscal devolution, so that we can retain more of the money that is raised in London. Let's talk also about things such as land value capture. If you look at the way that the Northern Line extension was funded, the government allowed the GLA to borrow against future business rates income in order to build that extension. Now that extension, the Northern Line extension, 2 kilometres of new tunnel, 2 new stations at Nine Elms and Battersea. What will the government allow us to borrow against in terms of future income that may be going to the Treasury for something like the Bakerloo line extension? Bakerloo line, 4 kilometres of new tunnel to Lewisham, 4 new stations. If they allowed us, for example, to borrow against stamp duty on new properties that are built as a result of that public transport infrastructure, coming to that part of South East London, that could be part of the funding solution to the Bakerloo line extension. So there's a whole range of really, really big, important discussions that need to start with government very urgently, given the news in the budget that the CSR is going to be running through until the end of July.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, just to clarify then, it seems that the sort of projects that are already ongoing, the Northern Line extension and so on, have already got funding, so that the first 5 years in the Mayor's Transport Strategy, there isn't too much of a problem. In fact, it looks like it's balanced. But then there's a lot of new projects coming in, like Crossrail, the Bakerloo Line extension, and you're sort of looking for measures and means to fund them. Is that a good summary of that?
There are a lot of things that we need to do in the next 5 years that we can't afford to do at the moment. And I made that point at the beginning. The signalling on the Piccadilly line, renewing the Bakerloo line fleet of trains. Ideally, we'd like to, be able to intensify the timetable on other lines as well, which may involve new rolling stock. I would also make this point, and I think it's a really important point for the Assembly to understand. Since I've been in this job, London has absorbed about £4 billion worth of cost because of the delays to Crossrail. When you add the revenue impact of the fares not coming in, which is estimated to be 1.35 billion, plus the financing deal that was done in 2018 with government for 2.15, and then take into account the additional capital cost that the Crossrail project estimated that they would need at the end of last year to complete the line. In total, that is £4 billion of revenue and capital costs that London, via TfL and the GLA, has absorbed. Now, the government insisted upon London bearing that cost. If London hadn't been bearing that cost, then it's perfectly possible that some of the sources of money that we're using to complete Crossrail 1 could have actually been used to pay for other things. And you will know, in the course of the last few years, we have had to take really difficult decisions. We have had to pause the Piccadilly line signalling. We've had to pause the work on Camden and Holborn Station. These are really significant schemes in central London locations. And so, that's the reality of the funding situation here. And, I cannot underestimate the extent to which I cannot underline to you anymore the extent to which investing in London's transport network is critical to the future of the country. This city is the engine of this country's economy, and if individuals and businesses in the future can't get to where they need to go, then that driving force that this city is, it won't go on forever. And I fear that the government is taking that for granted. And that's why, alongside the Mayor, I'll be making this argument very, very forcefully about investment in London's public transport network.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, I just want to ask, with the budget yesterday, the government's obviously extending its own public sector borrowing requirements. Did you get any signals from the budget yesterday that you will be allowed to do the same?
Not to my knowledge, no. I don't know whether Alex knows something that he's caught up on it that I haven't. I mean, in the budget, the London transport schemes were actually quite minor. So they have announced some funding for some road projects at Kew Bridge, Croydon Flyover, and the Anchor and Hope roundabout. They also announced 3 stations, I think, for step-free access on the mainline rail network. But it's a sort of drop in the ocean compared to what London's needs are, and that's the conversation that we need to have during the course of the CSR process.
Yeah, there's no announcement on borrowing and changing that. There's quite an interesting map about where all the investment is. and the list for London is the two things that Heidi mentions.
I noticed that.
You look at the rest of the country, and there's a much longer list.
Funny that,
So
yeah.
there is kind of, that is our concern, really, that we, in the CSR and the National Infrastructure Commission statement, we shouldn't lose sight of the acute needs in the capital.
So apart from asking during this CSR period, and I think you've got to get your bids in by the 20th of May, and then the closing period, or the government will then announce CSR in July, will you be asking not only for government to directly grant funds and projects, but also for increasing TfL's borrowing requirements?
I think one of the things you need to look at with TfL's borrowing is it needs to be affordable. And so you need to know that you've got the income to be covering it. And so that's the sort of conversation that I would want to have with the Chief Finance Officer.
And secondly, you talked about the Piccadilly line signalling. We have the new trains arriving between 23 and 24. If you were to get that project back on track and the funding was there in July, would the signalling upgrade be done for the new trains, or would there be a longer period?
I think, and I can check with Stuart Harvey, who is the Director of Major Projects at TfL, but I think the installation of new signalling would take longer. If you think about the way in which the 4LM project has worked on the District Circle, Metropolitan and Hammersmith and City line, the new trains are already rolling across that part of the network, but the new signalling, which is the explanation for the recent problems on the Metropolitan line in terms of reliability, is going in sections, and so I think that the overall time period for the signalling system, it's a longer project.
The other thing, the trains are going to, they're not going to all arrive in one weekend. It's going to be about a 3-year period to roll them out as well.
And Mike has said to us that actually it's a difference between a 12% increase in capacity or a 60%
Yes.
increase. It's fast, yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask was that although there was something about devolution on transport for the northern cities, there was nothing about devolution for London. Are you expecting any announcements on those rail lines, or will we have to wait and hope that in this English devolution paper the government to say they're going to publish in the summer, that there'll be something in that?
Yeah, so I've had some relatively recent discussions in the last couple of months with ministers about rail devolution, and you and I, Joe, have spoken about the devolution of the Great Northern services up through the area that you represent from Moorgate, and they go straight up to the Transport Secretary's constituency in Welwyn Garden City, and he in the past has said to me that he thinks it's a no-brainer for TfL to take control of those lines. We have been in positive discussions with ministers about that. We need the Department for Transport to give us the in principle go-ahead for those Great Northern services. They've also said to us that over time they would like a discussion about South Eastern as well, albeit they've got an immediate decision coming up, I think in April, on South Eastern, which may mean that, you know, perhaps there's an interim situation on South Eastern, and we can develop our plans more for taking control of the line there. I was anticipating something when the government published the Williams Review. That hasn't quite seen the light of day given the general election, and then you know, we've had the budget. I would very much hope that you know, when the government makes its intentions clear with regard to the future of the franchising system on the rail network, that within that we will see something positive about rail devolution in London.
Thank you. Just say we have written to the Secretary of State about the CSR. I don't know if you've seen a copy of that letter. We can make sure we sent that in the last few days. So just to add our support. Assemblymember Boff wanted to come in quickly, and then we're going to move on to Assemblymember Shaloni.
Ms Alexander, could you give me an example of the anti-London rhetoric that's coming out of government?
Well, I just think that if you take the example of the budget and you look at the overall quantum of investment that is going to other parts of the country compared to what is coming to London, I feel that, at the moment there's a potential that London's being taken for granted.
Is that rhetoric or is that a budget?
Well,
are they saying awful things about London?
Well, my I think a lot of members of the public who listen to the debate that is happening in national politics at the moment, they wouldn't be forgiven for thinking that the priority of this government, new ministers who are keen and eager to please, new parliamentary colleagues who represent constituencies in the Midlands and the North, if you look at where the Transport Secretary has been on recent visits, he's spent a lot of time up in places like Blythe Valley talking about reopening branch lines on the rail network there. And I think that the scale and the significance of the transport problems that we're facing in London, given the density of the population, given the number of people that come every day into the city to work here, even if they don't live here, requires a level of attention that has been lacking. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so caring for the neglected North means you're anti-London?
No, let's not get into this
Well,
debate now. You've
Miss
had an answer
Alexander
to it, I know, but I
used
really...
this phrase when she made her declaration to us. I'm just trying to understand what these examples are of anti-London rhetoric, because I haven't heard any.
Okay, but you've had an answer. I'm really conscious of time. I'm sorry, Assemblymember Boff. I really want to move on to transport planning to support good growth. Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to our guests. I'll keep this section brief, because I think we've covered some of the areas already. So it's just looking at the fact that obviously London continues to grow, and more and more people will be using public transport. And to enable that, we need to look at the Mayor's Transport Strategy section, which looks at the good growth. What are the advantages of using a good growth funding compared to other funding schemes?
Yeah, go on, Max.
The TfL has had a kind of TfL growth fund for many years. I think it was set up in after the Olympics in 2012, 2013. And that's a fund that it's established. It's quite a small part of our business plan. It's less than 5% of the total plan. But it's a really important fund in terms of supporting housing growth, integrating land use and transport planning, and also helping levering in investment from other parties, private sector or other public bodies. And the other component of this is it's delivering on other agendas as well. So often if we're delivering a station scheme that will support new growth in terms of the station capacity there, will also flow into that a design requirement that the station will be have step-free access as well. So I think there's a lot of advantages to us having this fund and having this approach to good growth, because we do need to accelerate delivery of housing across the capital, but we need to do that in a sustainable way that has got adequate transport infrastructure to support that.
I think this is an opportunity that TfL may continue to explore, because obviously we've just spoken about the fact that for some of the bigger transport infrastructure projects, we won't get that funding direct from the government. So the Good Growth Fund is specifically aimed at some of those smaller projects. Is this something that TfL would want to devote further down the line? Or?
Absolutely, and I think the Growth Fund continues. We're looking at, it's in our business plan for the next 5 years, a kind of circa £20 million allocation every year. And it's something that we're really keen to work with developers and work with boroughs to unlock kind of key development sites. And if you look at the history of the fund, it's been really effective in terms of unlocking developments all over London through investment in transport infrastructure, principally in public transport infrastructure, but occasionally in terms of highways investments. It's worth noting some of the key numbers: 22 schemes, and the funding is around 460 million from TfL, but that's helped unlock a very similar amount from the private sector, plus another 250 million from from the public sector, other public bodies as well. So it's good bang for buck, as it were, in terms of levering in other sources to help unlock growth areas all over London.
So just moving on of those 22 schemes, obviously one of them is the Bakerloo line extension,
Yep.
and which aims to improve opportunity areas. How are you going to make sure that the Good Growth Fund links into that in terms of looking at not just improved transport infrastructure, but whole scale and benefits to local areas?
Well, it already is. I mean, the best example of that is the work around Elephant Castle. You'll know there's 2 stations at Elephant Castle at the moment with a very poor interchange, and one of the and we're going to get a brand new Northern Line ticket hall station as part of the shopping centre development there. And the Growth Fund has helped us look at integrating that into a single station for the Bakerloo and Northern Line. So £7.5 million from the Growth Fund, matched by £7.5 million from London Borough of Southwark, will enable us to have one single station for the Bakerloo line and Northern Line extension at Elephant and Castle. So that is a great example where that scheme, hopefully they'll start work on that this calendar year. In many ways, the kind of first stage of the Bakerloo line extension in terms of that work. But what we want to do is the transport infrastructure that goes on the Bakerloo line down the Old Kent Road to New Cross and Lewisham, potentially on beyond to Hayes, is all about providing that excellent public transport service to support good growth, in terms of good growth from a sense of being not car-dependent growth. So 20,000 homes in Southwark, 27,000 homes in Lewisham, all delivered on the back of an excellent public transport service along that spine.
That's quite good. Just moving on, Deputy Mayor, in Policy 21 of the Transport Strategy, the Mayor lists targets relating to new jobs and new homes. And we just want to look at some of those targets in terms of how the Mayor can be held accountable when some of these targets are set quite beyond to the term of 2041, so it's quite far ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the pipeline of development that is associated with big new bits of transport infrastructure, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, even when schemes are consented through the planning process. There's often a delay to those schemes being built out. I will answer your question. I did just want to add to something that Alex was saying. The growth fund that exists within TfL is very important for all the reasons that Alex has outlined in terms of unlocking particular bits of improvement to the transport network and development. But the concept of good growth is delivered via TfL, not just through the Growth Fund, but a lot of different ways. So if you look at how successful we've been in securing funding through the Housing Infrastructure Fund on both the improvements to the DLR network, which will unlock a development in Poplar, as well as enabling a more intensive service to parts of East and South East London. We've also been successful with an East London line bid, which will result in a new station being built at Surrey Canal Road in the north of the borough of Lewisham. An upgrade to Surrey Quays Station really helps with the Canada Water development that British Land have. And then, of course, we've got the homes that TfL are building on land in their ownership. And some of those sites, pretty much all of those sites, are often directly next to tube stations and overground stations.
So like a tube station?
Indeed. And so, you know, if you look at how we are held accountable on those issues, you know, if you look at something like the TfL scorecard, for example, you know, we're taking it to the TfL board next week, but there's a very clear target on the scorecard.
Just on that scorecard, Deputy Mayor, but it's in the 2019-20 scorecard, it only gives a weighting of 2.5% to the outcomes of new homes and jobs. So given that this is a key target and key ambition, why is it given so little attention?
So that's actually, if the board approves it next week, that will change.
Okay.
So we have changed the target from being one that's focused on, I think the target in the 2019-20 scorecard was about where we have development partners in place or planning applications going through. It was one of those two, and we're moving to a target of having started on sites with a capacity to deliver 10,000 homes, and we're given a 5% weighting on the scorecard and not a 2.5% weighting to reflect the real priority that exists within TfL on that. And so, you know, this is reported also, progress with this sort of whole area is reported through the various committees and governance structures of TfL, whether that's, for example, with the Build to Rent programme. The Finance Committee have had discussions about the Build to Rent programme on TfL land. The Programme and Investment Committee also look at the Good Growth Fund and ensure that the objectives for the Growth Fund are being met in terms of the schemes that are being funded. And so I think there is, you know, a good amount of transparency around this, and you know, ultimately the Mayor, the Commissioner is accountable to the Mayor, and the Mayor is accountable to you and Londoners to deliver what he has set out in his strategy.
And another link is that the Commissioner is on the board of Homes for Londoners as well, because it's recognised that the delivery on our portfolio of land is really important to meeting that London-wide target.
Okay, so I suppose that's something that this committee would want to follow. Just finally from me, Chair, we've talked about the Good Growth Fund and benefits that it's bringing to a number of these schemes, but there seems to be a mismatch in that it doesn't appear to report on density, public transport access levels, or take-up of cycling in terms of good growth projects. In terms of saying that we've achieved good growth, how are you going to capture that if we haven't highlighted some of these key areas?
In terms of the cycling measure, that will increasingly be looked at as part of the evaluation of individual planning applications. And I think in many ways that's the most important way of looking at it, really, because I think the Good Growth Fund, or the Growth Fund rather, is for, as I say, 21 sites all over London. The team managed by Lucinda Turney are dealing with about over 300 planning applications each year, and as part of that they'll be looking at the density of development, the location of that development in terms of public transport access, but also are there opportunities to improve the access to the site and use of the site for people who are cycling as well. So it's embedded within the assessment process for referable planning applications that go to the Mayor, but also will obviously consider it with the Growth Fund as well.
Okay, so again, maybe that's something that the committee would want to monitor. Thank you. That's all from me,
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much to our guests today, Heidi, Deputy Mayor for London, Will, our Walking and Cycling Commissioner, and Alex from TfL. Thank you very much for your answers today. There's some follow-up things that we'll get for the information, which will obviously be for our new committee. So can we note the reporting discussion, members?
Noted.
Our work programme, can we note the additional activity undertaken since our last meeting, namely the Crossrail site visit, which was fantastic, those of us who went on it, and also the informal meeting with the Director of Transport Innovation at TfL. The date of our next meeting, it's the last meeting of the Assembly year, and our AGM, which is due to take place on the 15th of May, will decide which committees to establish for the next Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. If we could note that, and then any other business I'd say is urgent. I just want to put on record our thanks to members of the Transport Committee who are not standing again in the elections in May, or if it gets moved at some other point. So to our chair, Navin Shah, who is retiring, and Florence Eshalomi, who has been elected to the other place down the river, and same with Gareth as well, Gareth Bacon, who has also been elected elsewhere. Tom Copley, who is going up to the 8th floor. Wish you luck with that. And also, though he's not on the committee this year, I wanted to put on record also our best wishes to Assembly Member Steve O'Connell, who was on this committee with me for 11 years. So put our thanks to all those members for their work and contributions, and wish you luck in your next role elsewhere.
Can I just put on record my thanks to our current chair today, Caroline Pidgeon, who has been chair of this committee for a number of years and done an extremely good job, and also for stepping in at such short notice and getting these final reports out, which I don't think would have happened without your input. So thank you.
Well, thank you all members. Thank you for that, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much indeed.
GLA Chamber Sound.